Welcome back to another episode of Be Our Guest here on Musical Theater Radio. I am your host, as always, Jean-Paul Jovanoff. I'm always on the hunt for new or obscure musicals from around the world for the radio station, so I get to know lots of shows that most people have never heard of. I then read the book 366 Days, 366 Musicals, a musical theater trivia book and diary, and I happily discovered 60 more shows I had never heard of. Today, we have the author of the book, Aaron Netsky, on to tell us a little bit more about it and themselves. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thank you. 60. That's I suppose that's a good because I was worried. I say in the introduction, if you've heard of more than half of these, then I haven't done my job. But with you, I think I can make an exception of if only 60 of them were new for you, that's a special case, and I'm okay with that.
Oh yeah, I was going into, I wasn't sure when I went into the book. I was like, am I going to know most of these? I should, but then yeah, you came up with some that I was like, oh nope, never did know it, never did know it. And then ones I went, holy mackerel, where do you pull these from? So now, before we get into the book and everything, I always want to do a 30-second bio of my guests because we want to get to know who you are. So, Aaron, in 30 seconds, who are you?
Well, I was born and raised in Rochester, New York. I lived in New York for close to 11 years, and now I'm back in Rochester. In that time, over the course of middle school, high school, college, and professionally, I've done nearly every job I think that you can do in theater, from actor to usher, child wrangler to I participated in a talkback once, and the only real exceptions are I haven't really designed anything, and I would never stage manage because it scares me.
Those are a different breed, those people. I give them most props and power in the world. So yes.
Yeah. Some of the most important people in my life are stage managers. I have the utmost respect for them. I see what they do. I've worked for them, and it scares me.
Yeah, whenever I direct a show, I'm like, this person here, the stage manager, guys, you respect them or you're in so much trouble because they are the most important person, more important than me even, because they're going to be around with the show after I'm not. So yes, I 100% agree with that.
They don't scare me. The job scares me. They're the sweetest people.
Exactly. I know, it's crazy. So were you always into musicals growing up, or is that something you discovered a little bit later in life?
Uh, I wouldn't say 12 is later, but I did go a long time without really knowing what a musical was. It was I was in sixth grade, and first it was the chorus was doing a medley of songs from Phantom, and so I thought, oh, look at this, Phantom of the Opera, what's this? And then the next year, everyone in the middle school was supposed to be involved somehow with the musical production, whether backstage, on stage, lighting. So I had to be involved. I did stage crew because I was technically too young to be lighting and sound, which was where most of my interest was. Who knows where I would have gone if I'd been able to do that. You couldn't do that if you weren't in seventh grade. And I just watching the people on the stage, and it was two Andrew Lloyd Webber, the two Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals that are probably most people's gateway drug. And I just like, I want to be there, but I want to be singing the Phantom thing. So how can I make this happen?
Nice. And was that something that you pursued as you went through school and into post-secondary?
For I auditioned the next year, and I auditioned consistently. I got really into it. I started looking at Broadway musicals, but up until I actually started looking at colleges, my professional path was to be a veterinarian. That's what I was thinking academically.
Right.
And professionally. I couldn't pinpoint where the change happened, where I decided I want to do musicals instead. I want to be involved with that instead.
Yeah.
But it was sometime around when I actually had to make the decision about the next step and what programs to look at and what schools to look at.
And where did you end up going?
I went to SUNY Geneseo, which is a little school about 45 minutes south of where I grew up.
Okay. And so let's talk about the book. Now we know that you started getting interested in musical theater at age 12. You were going to become a vet, but that went by the wayside. So let's look at the book. When did you come up with the concept for this book?
Well, the original concept was for a microblog. I used to read slate.com, and I noticed that every day they had this column called Atlas Obscura, and I didn't realize at the time that it was its own website. And I just thought it was every day Slate would have this one little thing, and I thought, wow, that's neat. A different, and it was the idea is an obscure location somewhere that it's like you can go visit it, but you might have trouble finding it. It's off the beaten path. And I thought, doing a different one of those every day, and I also thought maybe it's one person, it's their hobby or something. Again, it's a whole website. They have a whole team, but I thought I want to try that. I want to do a thing where every day I have a different thing. It should be somehow musical theater related, substantial, obscure, and see if I can go a year and do that. And so I did ended up doing it on Tumblr because I didn't have a Tumblr yet, and I thought short form, all that sort of thing. And then when I had, so that was a year, and it's 366 because it happened to be 2015 into 2016, so it was a leap year, so February 29th. And after I had completed it, I took a little break, but then I kept adding more things and more variety of things. Uh, I did a Disney week and stuff like that. But I also had this was around the time I had started trying to write books. And so started looking at word counts and all that. How long should a book be? And so I looked at the word count of my total for all these posts, and it was 110,000 words. I was like, that's a book. That's a substantial book. And so for a while, it was just like if I'm fortunate enough that one of the actual books that I'm trying to get attention for gets me in the room, and they say, "What else do you have?" I can say, "Well, I have this musical theater thing that could be something." Uh, and but then after I started publishing on Amazon, learning that process, I thought, okay, I could do it myself, but what's the point? And
Mm.
eventually I came up with the idea of I didn't want to fill out I didn't know if I could fill like some of these things, some of these musicals, uh, there's just practically no information available to me via the internet. So I was like, I don't necessarily want it to be page after page of short essay, not quite Wikipedia, not quite a tweet, um, but putting the lines in and making it kind of an activity. And this is also kind of a people started giving me wreck this book sort of books, like activity book sort of things. And so I that so it was a whole bunch of things kind of coalescing, and I thought make it a diary in addition to a little micro encyclopedia type thing and trivia book. Make the entries very short, not very detailed, but at least one very interesting thing if there is a very interesting thing about each musical, and then the rest of it can be whatever the person wants, ideally their own personal experience with the musical if they have it.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting idea. The top half is the show, and then you've got the lines underneath. So you can put whatever you want, like a diary about the show or whatever you're feeling. I thought that was a very brilliant, interesting concept for putting that together like that. Congratulations on that idea.
My tagline is buy the book for my contribution, keep it for your contribution.
Nice. So does that mean they get co-author credits? You got to split the royalty with these people now.
If
So
anyone manages to fill in the entire book, that could be the prize.
okay, that seems fair.
But
Awesome.
I suppose it's only their copy then, so I guess they'd be entitled to a half of a refund or something like that
Okay,
for their
yeah,
royalty for their copy because they don't get credit for the one that you have or somebody else has.
totally makes sense. Well, we'll worry about that when it
Yeah,
comes up when that issue
if
happens.
it happens.
That's right. So there are obviously 366 musicals in here. And you obviously looked at more than that probably over your time creating things like that. First of all, I guess, how did you choose the musicals, and then how did you pare them down to what you wrote?
For the initial project, it was just whatever I could find because I was desperate to fill it up. I wanted to make sure I didn't miss a day because that was the whole point of the project. Can I keep this going consistently? If a day came along where I thought, am I going to have internet access? Am I going to be able to post it? That was more panic than it should have been, but still kind of I want to do this. I want to make sure. Now I relish a day without the internet. So initially it was whatever came my way. I actually reached out to people um, every so often saying, I need to fill in a few days. Anybody got any musicals that you think I haven't used yet? And Hallelujah Baby is one of those that came along that way. I put out the request and someone said, have you done Hallelujah Baby? I said, no, I'll look at it. I'll look into it. Um, and like I said, after I finished the initial 366, I think I've got 100 entries that I then did I called it 367 and beyond. And so I've got about 100 entries written that I didn't use in the book. And there are, I think, 10 entries in the book that I didn't even do that are completely new for the book because they came to my attention later. But as far as whittling it down, the process started with plugging in the brand new entries like 21 Chump Street and Hadestown and How to Dance in Ohio. And because I knew the reason I picked those is because I had specific days in mind. And then for the most part, I tried not to assign specific musicals to specific days for any reason other than I put the Titanic musical on the day that the Titanic sank. But I had tried to, since the Tumblr was done on not just specific days of the calendar, but specific days of specific years, I could more readily assign them. But this I wanted to be more generic and also not necessarily declare in the book, this day is a special day. I declared a special day because somebody might buy the book and a day that is a special day for me might not be a special day for them. It might be a holiday that I celebrate that they don't, or some other thing.
Mhm.
So there are musicals in there that I put on specific days for specific reasons. For the most part, unless I say Annie Oakley was born on this day, that's why this musical is here, it will be invisible to them why a musical that's special on a special day for me is assigned to that day. And it, again, makes it more theirs. They can write in what makes that day special for them. And then from there, after I had assigned the few special days, I kind of went through and I tried to scramble so that they weren't in the exact same order that they were on Tumblr. I wanted it to be as random as possible. Still came up with like things closely set that are related in some way because you can't avoid that completely. But so it was a couple of different processes trying to make it as unique as it could be.
Now, of the 366, how many of them did you know before? I'm just curious because you said you had people throw them at you like Hallelujah Baby. But you know, in the book, you've got Hamilton, obviously, and things like that. You got the big ones that if you don't know, then I don't know why you're in musical theater or even listening to this podcast. If you don't know these big ones, then you got things like you know, Glam Slam Ulysses and things like that. That's one of them. I was like, I have no idea what this is. I've never heard of it. You know, how many of them did you know beforehand, and how many did you find out about?
Well, Glam Slam Ulysses, just the only reason I found out about that is because Prince died while I was doing this.
Mm.
And so in all this stuff going on about him, I found out, oh, he actually wrote a musical. David Bowie died around the same time. And I think I knew that he had a musical, but the musical was being workshopped, I think, around the time that he died. And so it was in the news, but also part of his obituaries. As far as how many I knew before, well, I went through the book and actually did my own how many do I have personal experience with, have I seen or been involved in, and that's 103.
Okay.
Mostly that I've seen. I haven't been involved in 100 shows, unfortunately. But as far as how many that I was just familiar with off the top of my head, probably a little more than half. It's hard to say exactly, because even some of the more obscure ones, it's not so much a matter. It's just a matter of just random happenstance. If I hadn't worked with a certain person who told me about the Anne of Green Gables musical on St. Edward's Island, I would not have known about that because I haven't even read Anne of Green Gables. I'm very little interest, except now I know it's a musical. I've had very little interest in that. Or I was standing in line with someone. They told me about the Prince and the Pauper one. If not for those things, so I guess I've just been lucky to meet the right random people at the right random times. But I would say I knew a fair few of them. It's hard because it's 7 years ago that I
Yeah.
did this, or more, I think, at this point, that I first learned about these shows and put them into the thing. So it's hard to say for sure, but most of them are probably just by osmosis or something I read. Like there are a couple there that I really only know about because I read Ghostlight by Frank Rich at the right time, made note of certain things.
Yeah, for me it was like I said, I my job is to find shows and things like that. That some of these I obviously knew because they're huge. Some of them I obscurely found out about. Like Only Human, that one I just happened to be in New York at that time, and I missed it by one day because I think they closed early. But I wanted to go see it, and that was just, again, like you said, happenstance. You meet the right person, you're just at the right time to learn about them. So some of the shows for me, I don't really know them that well, but um which one of the shows for yourself did you discover and went, oh, I wish I could see this, or listen to the cast recording of, if they even existed?
Um, let's see. Cinderella versus the Wolfman, or
Yeah.
Cinderella meets the Wolfman, whichever, it's one of those. That intrigues me as somebody who I've got the box set of the Universal Monster classic monsters with the Bela Lugosi Dracula and the Boris Karloff Frankenstein. So that one intrigues me a lot. And Island of the Lost Coeds even more because I have, like, that's the tiniest. I think that is the smallest entry in the book because there's just very little, but it's by the people who wrote Grease. And so I'm like, and again, it's kind of like a classic 40s, 50s monster horror spoof. Um, and so those are the two top ones just because they're the most obscure. But then there are some the Joan of Arc musical, Jean, and the Jack the Ripper musical.
Mm.
Uh, the interesting trivia about those is that the cast recordings were recorded at the time in 1975 for Jack the Ripper, 1985 for Jean, somewhere in there, but then they just weren't released until 2015. And that's probably how I found out about them, because they were released and Amazon, the algorithm told me, you might like these. That's how I learned about those.
Huh.
So I guess the algorithm is good for something. But that made those cast recordings more interesting to me because, oh, these are time capsules. These have not been in the ether, and but they're brand new cast recordings of old shows, and they're the older recordings, so they're from the time. So things like that. Some of them are just for random reasons.
I noticed that, and because I'm about here in Canada, I noticed you have a lot of Canadian musicals in here, which surprised me. Like you said, Anne of Green Gables, so Prince Edward Island, that's been running forever. I got to see it out there. You got Evil Dead. You've got the one that surprised me is Telltale Harbor, because I was like, what? That was the first one
Well,
that threw me when I was reading it.
being Canadian, did you know Great Big Sea?
Of course, yeah. If I
Yeah.
don't, I get my citizenship revoked. So
Well, I know. So but that even almost snuck past me. I forget exactly how I learned about it. Probably, I mean, I check in on them every so often, even though the band broke up, but I do check in on them every so often. And I read at least Alan Doyle's first memoir, and I guess I was looking to see if he'd written any more, because that was my favorite band.
Mhm.
And as I say in the entry, I always thought, I was into Great Big Sea, I was into musicals at the same time, and it was the era, it was the jukebox musical awakening. So I was thinking, well, a Great Big Sea jukebox musical, sea shanties, takes place on a ship. That could be fun. And this isn't exactly that because they wrote original music for it. But that was an especially um, that was an exciting thing for me because it was almost like a wish had come true. It was a wish had come true. Alan Doyle wrote a musical. He's in it. He's on the cast recording, and it's kind of like the first new Great Big Sea album in years. And so that, but yeah, I was I for a long time musicals were American or British, at least as far as I knew.
Mhm.
But then I learned, oh, there are German musicals, there are Korean musicals, and there are Canadian musicals. Lord of the Rings is a Canadian musical. Well, maybe it's a British musical. I don't. I think it's first. The cast recording is Toronto, so I
Yes.
think that means something as far as the nationality of the musical. But yeah, that I don't have a ton of international musicals in there. They're mostly either British or American, and they're frankly mostly American. But musical theater is an American art form, so it makes sense. But I was glad, but and even like the one of the more exciting, like if I ever go to Germany, I always thought if I ever go to Germany, I'll try to see Tanz der Vampire because I loved
Hmm.
seeing Dance the Vampires. But apparently, if I go to Germany, I've got to see Starlight Express because it's in the Starlight Theater built specifically for it. And I was like,
Yeah.
I'm not otherwise not particularly interested in seeing Starlight Express, nothing against it, but to see that production that is one of the longest running productions in the world, that's an institution. It's
Yeah.
yeah, so it's kind of like Anne of Green Gables in Canada. It's the or Phantom of the Opera was on Broadway and in London still. It's the one that's there that will always be there. I guess we learned not necessarily always, uh, but yeah, musicals from other countries. Elizabeth, the German musical that
Hmm.
I learned about from Stacy's Musical Village, which is another thing I hadn't thought about Stacy's Musical Village in years. It's a website that I went to when I was first getting into musicals, and it's shut down. But I was glad to be able to write about it in the book because I get to pay tribute to it. I don't know how many people are ever going to read the book, but I memorialized that important website that I don't know how many other books it's going to be mentioned in, but I was glad that I would remembered to put it in there.
Well, that was a bit of a tease because when you mentioned the website, I was like, oh, okay, I got to look this up. And then what is it? A sentence or two later, it is shut down. And I was like, great. Now I can't go look at that website. But yeah, I actually got to see Lord of the Rings here in Toronto, and it was okay. It was a massive craziness. The story is my friend was the front of house manager for the theater, and the orcs kept triggering the safety measures, so the mountain kept stopping, and the show had to, like 20-minute delays and things like that. It was quite the experience. But and the guy who played Gollum, I went to school with, he was fantastic, just to say. So just little tidbit trivia about
Yeah,
that.
that's what it's all about.
And I agree about Germany. Damn, I want to see Starlight Express just in that theater, because that would be, where else are you going to see that show? Never.
Yeah, I don't imagine. I mean, I don't track its productions, but what with the roller skating and
Yeah.
everything, um, yeah, I just don't know how often it's put on. But it's got some good songs.
Yeah. And going through some of them, I was like, I'm looking at the shows going, I've interviewed a number of these people from the shows that you were talking about, like From Here to Eternity. As soon as I saw that, I was like, Stuart. Stuart's a huge fan of ours, and he comes on the show quite often for podcasts and stuff like that. So I was so excited to see that. And Eleanor, An American Love Story. I just interviewed him as well. So, like, how did you find out some of these? Because some of these that I just mentioned aren't obscure, but they're not in the musical theater norm as well.
Well, a former teacher was in From Here to Eternity at the Merry-Go-Round Playhouse in Auburn, and that is how I knew about that one. And I listened to your interview with Timothy. What was it, Timothy? The guy
Me,
who co-wrote Eleanor. What?
I would Meehan? No. You would think I would know
Well,
these, but after 200 interviews, I get confused.
yeah, you're under no obligation. But with that one, I listened to that and he was talking about. I think I know this musical, but how do I know this musical?
Yeah.
And then he mentioned John Forster, that's who I met,
Mm,
who he co-wrote it with, and I happened to sit down next to him at a cabaret show and talk to him for a while. And that's also how I got the Shroud of Turin musical, Into the Light or whatever it's called.
yeah.
I happened to sit down next to a guy who wrote two obscure musicals, and and again, it's just random. I met him because I knew somebody else, and I'd done this project with somebody else, and I was invited to this thing, and I happened to sit down next to him, and we got to talking. That's another thing. You have to get to talking
Hmm.
uh, with the other person, with the person you're sitting with. It's not always easy. You might be shy. They might be shy. One or other might be on their phone or their other device. But you got to get to talking with people because that's how you learn about 366 musicals that you wouldn't otherwise know. And it's important to know about as many musicals as possible as we know.
Oh, for sure, for sure. The more you know, the better you are. If you're a writer or director, or actor, or just anything, the more information you know, the better. But yeah, it must be. I think if you're in New York, you can just probably sit down next to somebody, and the 6 degrees of separation kick in, because in New York, everybody knows somebody who knows somebody. Um, and yeah, and you must have taken advantage of that, obviously, a number of times.
I guess I did, and like several of these musicals, like I mentioned, my friend Marcy in the book, she's a stage manager and a very, very good friend, and she hired me several times. And so some of the musicals I know about because she hired me to work on them with her. And then while we were working on the musicals, she would occasionally take a week in New Jersey or in New Haven and go work on briefly a reading of another musical. And so that's how I learned about those musicals.
Mhm.
And so she's the source of like six of these. And just that one person alone, because she worked on them. Some of them she invited me to work on them with. Some of them she took a week off while I was, and she left me to work with somebody else. Um, and uh, and again, it's a series of events that could not be predicted. I didn't go to an effort to learn about most of these musicals.
Yeah. So I guess the big question is, will there be a sequel? 365 days?
Um, they I wouldn't
Or are you not allowed to
necessarily.
say?
I'm not. It's not that I published
Oh.
it myself, so I can do and say
Oh,
whatever I
okay, you know
want with
everyone.
regard to it. It's just a matter of the effort that went into it, even with preloaded. And I rewrote most of these entries because, again, they referred to specific days of not just the calendar, but specific years. And so most of them had to be rewritten. And it was a lot of work. But that was a lot of work with them pre-written and then rewriting them. I'd have to start, like I said, I have 100 that I didn't use, but I didn't use them because I didn't really want to.
Mm.
Um, there, there are a few musicals in here that I actively don't like, but I, pretend I don't pretend to like them, but the idea is that they're interesting, not that they're necessarily good. And but they're the musicals that I left out, I just didn't want to use for the most part. And so I would probably have to start from scratch, and it's a lot of work. And so if this book took off and there was a call for a sequel and some actual book company wanted to pay me enough money to buy a house in which to work, uh, and to buy so that I could get tickets and see shows and further explore.
Yeah.
Then I would do it on my own. I think if a sequel were to happen, I'd rather it be crowdsourced. Like I'd rather get 100 or more people,
Yeah.
and they can write entries because then you get like, and you could probably source some of these people from what I've seen the musicals that you advertise on social
Yeah.
media. They could write about their own. They could write about things that they've seen that are not in the book.
Mhm.
Um, I could, given enough time right now, off the top of my head, list 400 musicals that are not in the book. So I've got them. I just don't want to do that because, again, it's a lot of I mean, if the book is successful, it will turn out to have been paid labor. But right now, it's purely unpaid labor, and it's fun, but it's yeah. Uh, but I do think that crowdsourced and possibly um, like the proceeds rather since it be crowdsourced the proceeds rather than going to an individual or being split among people because that wouldn't be a lot anyway,
Mm.
would go to some cause or something, uh, some theater related cause.
Yeah.
Uh, but I I I'm just proud of the thing that I made, and it's enough for me.
Nice. Um, are you working on anything else right now? Anything you want to promote?
Musical theater wise, no,
Just in
I'm
general.
in well, not really in general either. I this was again, it took a lot out of me,
Yeah.
especially some of the like memories of people who I don't or can't be in, or I don't or can't communicate with anymore. So it was also an emotional thing because in addition to trivia book and diary, I put it's got some memoir aspects too. Some of the entries are there's a little bit about the musical itself, but then they're about me and what was meaningful, especially like The Wiz and how I played the bass in for The Wiz, and my bass teacher was dying of brain cancer while he was teaching me the part, and he was like, when you talk to him, it was obvious something was going on with his head that shouldn't be, but when he was teaching the music, he was as sharp as a tack.
Yeah.
And but it was still, you know, hard to write about. But again, I'm glad that I could put him and that memory into book form. However many people read it, they'll know about him. So, but I'm not. I don't know what the next thing creatively or musical theater that I'll be involved with will be. I'll let you know, though, of course.
Cool. And most importantly, how do people get the book? Where do they find it?
They can go on Amazon. They can either search the title, they can search my name, Aaronnetsky, and it's shorter than spelling out the title of the book. And I got a couple other books there that aren't specifically musical theater related, but there are musicals referred to in them. But yeah, it's an Amazon published book, and there's an ebook too, but you know, you can't write in an ebook. And so in the ebook, and I felt a little bit bad about putting it out as an ebook, but I do say in the introduction, and the introduction people can read for free on the ebook. It's part of the free sample. I say, this is where you might want to consider getting the paperback instead. So I do, it's not purely a financial motivation saying people get the more expensive one. I think it's actually worth it, because I would love it if people actually use this thing to make it their own time capsule of their memories of musicals.
Well, it was a very cool concept, and I'm so happy you reached out to me, because like I said, you introduced me to 60 new shows I've got to learn more about. So find those cast recordings if they exist. Now I have to do that. So
I look forward to the name this musical posts on social media, and seeing if I can guess, oh, did he learned about that from my book, but can I guess what it is?
exactly. Some of them you might be the only one who gets it. So who knows? But
I'll check the reply. I won't answer them, but I'll check the replies. I'll
okay.
see if anybody else does.
Aaron, congratulations on the book. It was a great read, and I think everybody who loves musical theater trivia should pick this up and take a look at it. So congratulations on the book.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. All right, we were just speaking with Aaron Netsky, the author of 366 Days, 366 Musicals, a musical theater trivia book and diary. Tune in next week as we'll speak with another guest or guests about their life, love, and passion that is musical theater. I am your host, as always, Jean-Paul Yovanov, and until next time, I'll see you when I see you.